Ahead on WRAL Triangle and Two, UNC Hoops recruit Elliot Cadeau has reclassified. He'll enroll early in Chapel Hill. We'll also discuss the expectations for the Carolina Hurricanes next season. But we start. Welcome into WRAL Triangle and Two. I'm your host, Mark Bergin, joined by WRAL sports investigative reporter Brian Murphy. He's filling in for Luis Fernandez today. And Murph, I'm happy to have you on here today because we're going to be talking about an issue here that lawmakers are set to take up this week. Online sports gambling, something that lawmakers will consider here in the state legislature in Raleigh here just this week. Welcome in.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. And you're right. Yes, sports gambling is going to be in the news here all week.
So what is happening this week? Because I know that this is something where it's been going back and forth between both the House and the Senate. What happens this week here, Murph?
Yeah, I think we're going to see Senate passage this week. A couple Senate committees are going to consider this early in the week. And then later in the week, the Senate will have 2 days of voting on sports gambling. We've seen lots and lots of changes to the bill. I think we'll see a few more changes to the bill before it gets through this process. But when it's all said and done, I think that the Senate will vote for it, and then it'll go over to the House. I was worried, as someone who's been covering this, that the House wasn't going to agree to the changes that the Senate made. But it does seem like the House is on board with some of the changes that the Senate's made. That includes increasing the tax rate, getting rid of deductions for promotions and credits that the sports gambling operators often use to get people to sign up on their sites. I mean, I think one of the other big changes is that you will be allowed to do in-person cash betting. Previously, there were these sports lounges, and that's what I referred to them as, because you could go and watch television, but you'd have to bet on your phone. Now you'll be able to actually go to PNC Arena when they create a sports book and bet with cash on the game that you're watching. And I think that will bring in a lot of casual bettors who are going to the Hurricanes game and want to put a little bit of money down, but don't want to download an app, fund it with their credit card. What is this? I don't really know what I'm talking about. But if you just go to the window and you say, hey, I want to put $20 on the Hurricanes, that's easy enough.
So when this comes to fruition, assuming it goes through, Murph, when they talk about the number of licenses that the state will distribute, would that be considered to say, okay, PNC would have one of those 12 licenses? Could you explain how that works?
Yeah, there's still a little bit up in the air about that, but there will be 12 licenses, and the sports gambling operators will have to apply for them because you're going to have to show a demonstrated history of being able to do this, right? And PNC Arena doesn't have a demonstrated history of being able to do online mobile sports gambling. However, there are criteria in the application and criteria in the process that the Lottery Commission has to evaluate that talks about your partner in a place of public accommodation. That's what they're calling sportsbooks, a place of public accommodation. And so the way that the bill is currently written, it looks like the mobile operators that have partnerships with the venues or with the teams are going to move to the head of the line. And so PNC Arena may not have one of the licenses, but the partnership with PNC Arena will be critical in whatever, whether it's FanDuel or DraftKings or Caesars or you name it, getting that license. And so this is, teams really can't hold these licenses. The NFL doesn't allow their team to hold a sports gambling license. But if partnering with Bank of America Stadium is the way for an online operator to get one, then in essence, their relationship with the Panthers becomes very, very important.
Do you know where the number, whether it's 12, whether it was 14, how do lawmakers decide on that number to say we're going to give away X amount of licenses? How do they decide on that?
I don't know. It's a great question because some places have done 30 or dozens or, up to 60 of these licenses. I think 12 is, from my understanding, the operators were involved in some of this. And I think 12 is enough to hit all of your main, this is an industry that has lots and lots of operators, but I think 12 is enough that everybody is satisfied. It's not so small that you're fighting over these. It's not so large that the marketplace is saturated and no company can make any money because everybody has such a small share of the market. I think 12 is a number where the operators think they can make money, but not so small that they think they can still get a license.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out to anyone listening or watching this right now, if this does in fact become a law, January 8th would be the effective date. So there's going to be a lot of people who are in for a rude awakening where New Year's Day, Murph, where you've got the Rose Bowl and you've got all these great college football playoff. You get the CFP in college football. You've got a lot of great late season NFL regular season action. You're going to have to wait till January the 8th if this does in fact become law in the state of North Carolina. But we are moving closer to that. And this was, something that lawmakers considered a year ago. It did not come to fruition. And so here we are again in 2023, again, considering this as law. And again, I know there's going to be a lot of action here this week as lawmakers continue to debate and discuss.
And I have even worse news for fans. That January 8th date may be the soonest date that this happens. I mean, we're pushing now into June. This is not going to get passed until at least the middle of June, maybe late June by the time it gets back through the House. My understanding is that the bill may be tweaked slightly to say that they would have up to a year from passage of this bill in order to get sports gambling up and running. I know they're going to push for it as soon as possible, and I think January 8th will still be the earliest date that it could happen. But that date may have some flexibility in that date. You think about it. We just talked about 12 licenses. All these people have to apply. All these companies will have to create partnerships with Charlotte Motor Speedway and Bank of America Stadium and PNC Arena and you name it, and all the teams. Then they're going to have to apply to the Lottery Commission. The Lottery Commission has a whole list of criteria that they're going to have to evaluate these applications on before deciding which 12 get them. And then they'll have to put some rules and regulations about what exactly you can bet on. Can you bet on the NFL draft? Some states allow you to bet on things like the draft. Some don't. So there is a lot of back end work that the Lottery Commission will have to put into place, and they don't want to give anyone a first mover status. So they want all 12 all 12 licenses to go live at the exact same time. Nobody, just because you operate this in 25 other states, doesn't mean you're going to get a jump on the people in North Carolina. So January 8th is the first date. I think when it's all said and done, January 8th may be the first date that this could happen, but be prepared for it to drag on a little bit longer too.
Good insight there. And I know that the front offices for the pro sports teams, whether it's the Carolina Hurricanes or the Charlotte Hornets, from an ownership standpoint, they want to make every penny, nickel, and dime on the dollar that they can. So if they have sports books available at the stadiums and arenas where they participate, that's yet another way that the teams can create revenue for themselves. So I've noticed that, Murph, and we'll see how all this shakes out this week. But speaking of the Carolina Hurricanes, we've got the Stanley Cup final. Hurricanes get swept in the conference finals. And I couldn't help but wonder, when I was watching this entire series where it's like, Andrei Svechnikov, you could borrow my ACL. Would he have made a difference? I have a few thoughts about what to expect for this upcoming season, Murph, but I really wish we could have seen him play, because it was like the Canes fulfilled their goal quota in the round before against the Devils, yet they struggled to put the puck in the net in the conference final.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big lament of this season, right? Don Waddell told me before the season that this was the best team that the Hurricanes had on paper. He'd have to see how they performed, but it was the best team that he'd put together, he thought, on paper. And they never really got to see that team. Pacioretty gets hurt, misses most of the beginning of the season, comes back, gets hurt again, and is out for the rest of the year. Obviously, Svechnikov not being available for the stretch run in the playoffs, is something that I think is a big what if. They finished with the second best record in the league, the second most points, and Boston got knocked out. It really felt like the path was there. They were the favorites to win the Stanley Cup entering the Eastern Conference final. And it ran into a juggernaut in the Panthers, not necessarily a regular season juggernaut, but at least for 4 games between Matthew Tkachuk, scoring every time he needed to score, and Sergei Bobrovsky, stopping every puck he needed to stop. That happens in hockey sometimes, but I think the big question for the Hurricanes is, do you need to go out and get someone like a Matthew Tkachuk? Obviously, he's not going to be available, but a difference maker, or do you have enough difference makers on your roster if everybody's healthy? That's going to be the big storyline, I think, all off season.
You take away the all-star forward, and again, the goal production, I thought, suffered somewhat in the matchup with the Panthers. I'm going to go from the other side, though. Whether it's Freddie Andersen, Antti, Raanta, neither player is under contract for next season. So you might have a new goaltender in net as well. And we see what happens when you get a hot goaltender in the playoffs, how that can propel a deep postseason run. And whether it was luck, whether it was skill, Sergei Bobrovsky for the Florida Panthers. There, I did it. I knew I was going to do it. For the Florida Panthers, I really thought was the difference in the series.
Yeah, and he's been the best goaltender in the NHL 2 times. I mean, 2 times he's been awarded, the Vezina Trophy for the best goaltender in the league. Now that was a while ago, but he certainly has that in him. And I did not think goaltending was the Hurricanes' problem in this series. I mean, these were all 1-goal games. They weren't letting in a ton of soft goals or anything like that. Kochetkov is under contract, and I imagine he's going to be a part of a job share. Mm-hmm. How do you fill those other 41 games? Let's assume it's a true job share and that Kochetkov gets 41 games. Well, how do you fill the other 41 games? You need a goalie who's comfortable only playing half the time, able to perform when he does get in there, and who can be your starter if Kochetkov gets injured or doesn't play well. So it's a very specific need. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to bring back Andersen or Raanta. They're certainly not going to bring back both of them. Or do you go find somebody else who can be a little bit more of a mentor role for someone like Kochetkov? But this nucleus really is only together next year. I mean, if you look at the contract structure, they've got one more big run in them before a lot of hard decisions have to be made. Obviously, a salary cap league, so that's going to start to play a factor. But this is the offseason, I think, where the Hurricanes, can take their next best shot at trying to win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll see. Can they make it 6 consecutive playoff appearances under head coach Ron Brindamore and company? And Petty Mark's going to come out here on the podcast today, Murph. I actually do hope the Florida Panthers end up winning the Stanley Cup, because then you can say, hey, you lost to the team that won the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, I think it's a big offseason in other ways too, right? I cover a lot of what's happening at PNC Arena. There's a lot of talk about PNC Arena getting a massive upgrade, massive renovations. That's going to be decided this summer. The Hurricanes are right now negotiating a lease extension with Centennial Authority to stay at PNC Arena longer. And I think, things like the Stadium Series really prove that Raleigh is a hockey market and a place that a team can thrive. You mentioned, some of the ancillary income that might come from a sports book. I mean, it seems like things are going in the direction that the Hurricanes want. But it will be a big offseason, not only for what they do with the roster, but some of those improvements to PNC Arena and whether they can nail down a long-term lease agreement with the Hurricanes too.
From the ice to the hardwood, final topic of today's WRAL Triangle and Two. And we go to Chapel Hill, where Elliot Cadeau will reclassify and enroll early as a member of the the Tar Heels. And Murph, this is welcome news, because the Tar Heels had a loaded recruiting class for 2024, but they're getting help and reinforcements earlier on. And now that Cadeau has decided to reclassify.
Yeah, this has been, long simmering. There's been a lot of talk about Cadeau moving to the class of 2023. They can certainly use the help. Obviously, this is a team that didn't make the NCAA tournament last year, and they lose someone like Caleb Love to the transfer portal. They've lost most of their roster to the transfer portal. Let's be honest. They got Backcourt and RJ Davis back. That's my big question. How does this work with RJ Davis, who I thought was your point guard? I thought the team was better when RJ Davis was the point guard last year and Caleb Love played off the ball. Now you get a true point guard in Cadeau. Seen a lot of comparisons to Kendall Marshall, a guy who really can pass, really set up teammates, really be that pass first point guard that college, quite frankly, basketball doesn't have all that often these days, but Carolina has had those guys in the past. Ed Cota, Kendall Marshall, a whole host of them. Does the team function better with a pass first point guard? And Cadeau has certainly lit up the AAU circuit and the high school circuit, and he's played a lot of international basketball. I think Hubert Davis, in a lot of ways faces a critical season here. Is this going to be a third straight year where they're on the bubble, maybe making the tournament, maybe not? Or is it going to harken back to those great 6 weeks that they had last season where they beat Duke in the final home game for Mike Krzyzewski and went on a run to the Final Four? This year may tell us a lot. It's Hubert Davis's roster. He constructed it almost entirely through recruiting and through the transfer portal. So these are Davis's players now.
Yeah, and for me, it's not so much the offensive end, but the defensive end, Murph, where you've got both RJ Davis and Cadeau are both listed at 6 foot. So how do you defend an opposing team if they have a bigger backcourt? Can you play both Davis and Cadeau on the floor at the same time together? And then if you do, are both of them accustomed to playing with the ball in their hands, with the ball out of their hands? I'm very curious to see how all that shakes out. And I would think that RJ Davis would get the first crack at it as someone who has been a member of the Tar Heels and played in a lot of big games through the years, whereas Cadeau, as an incoming freshman, just doesn't have as much experience at the collegiate level.
Yeah, a great point on the defense, because they don't have a rim protector either. It's not like they have, Derek Lively behind them. Armando Bacot, a very good player, all ACC caliber player, but not a rim protecting big man like you'd like to have behind two small guards. To your other point, I don't think Elliot Cadeau reclassifies if he's not getting the starting job, if he's not guaranteed a spot on the roster. I mean, there's no need for him to come in if he's gonna sit the bench at all, I think. And so I think we'll see. Davis has played off the ball. With Caleb Love, a lot of times, one of them was off the ball and one of them was on the ball. Mm-hmm. Love was a little bigger, though, to your defensive point. One of these guys is going to have to guard a shooting guard who's probably going to be 6'3", 6'4", and how does that work? But I don't think Elliot Cadeau is coming to sit on the bench behind RJ Davis. Mm-hmm. I assume that he's coming to both play at the same time as RJ Davis.
All right. And Caleb Love is still out there in the transfer portal right now. So it's like, I don't expect him to be back in Chapel Hill, but I am very curious to see where he winds up as well. As we move closer and closer to where it's like we're going to be in the summer months. The longer this goes on, Murph, the more and more I'm just going to speculate about all of this.
Arizona has seemed to be a front runner for his services, and we'll see if he ends up there. I think it's been an interesting offseason for all three Triangle teams in the ACC. Duke is going to be the preseason number one. I mean, they got pretty much everybody that could come back is coming back. Filipowski, Proctor, Jeremy Roach, Mitchell. Combine it with another great recruiting class. They're going to be in the role of North Carolina was last year, preseason number one. Can they live up to it? And I think NC State fans will think that they had a great offseason as well with the transfer portal. So a lot of excitement, I think, around all three teams at this point.
Absolutely. Brian Murphy, do you have anything that you need to plug this week for your coverage? You are fantastic. I would encourage any listeners and viewers to go look at his work, consume his work, read his work, because it'll tell you what's going to happen before it happens. But anything you want to plug here before we go?
Well, I appreciate that. I think the sports betting thing, I'll be covering that all week, and we'll get a good sense by the end of the week if this is going to pass. And I know it's probably the primary question I get. When are we going to get sports gambling? When are we going to get sports gambling? And again, as you pointed out, not till January, but this may be the week that it really falls into place as they sprint to the finish line.
Murph, I appreciate your time. I'll go ahead and sign off for the both of us. For Brian Murphy, I'm Mark Bergin. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen and watch WRAL Triangle and Two. We'll see you next time. Until then, take care and so long, everybody.